The boardroom smelled of polished wood, stale cologne, and the kind of entitlement that never fades. A long walnut table stretched across the room, surrounded by high-backed leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's annual rent. At the head of the table sat Leonard Whitmore, my father-in-law, his posture rigid, his expression carved from disapproval. He looked at me the way someone looks at gum stuck to the sole of an expensive shoe. I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Daniel Foster. I'm 63 years old now, and I've been married to Eleanor Whitmore for 37 years. We live in a modest bungalow in North York, Toronto, about 1,600 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom that groans every winter. The kind of house where you hear the furnace kick in at night and can tell what the neighbors are cooking just by opening a window. Eleanor and I met in 1985 at a community center fundraiser. She was volunteering, pouring coffee into mismatched cups, laughing like the cold outside didn't exist. It was November, bitter and gray, but her smile made it feel like July. I was 26, juggling 2 jobs, wearing a second-hand suit jacket with fraying elbows. She didn't notice any of that, or maybe she did and didn't care. We talked for hours that night, about books, about work, about what kind of life we wanted. 6 months later, we were married. Small ceremony, folding chairs, a borrowed sound system. Her parents didn't attend. Leonard Whitmore made it very clear that his daughter was marrying beneath her station and that he wanted no part of it. Eleanor chose me anyway. What Leonard never knew, what Eleanor herself wouldn't fully understand until decades later, was that I wasn't just some working-class kid from Scarborough scraping by. My grandfather had been a silent partner in several mining operations in northern Ontario. Quiet man, smart investor. When he passed away in 1983, he left everything to me. Land, mineral rights, long-term investments that were just beginning to mature. By 1987, my net worth was around $40 million. By 1995, closer to $200 million. By 2010, just over $800 million. Today, if you want precision, I'm worth about $1.4 billion. And I never told anyone. Not the people at the manufacturing plant where I worked for 30 years, not our neighbors, not even Eleanor. At least, not until much later, and especially not Leonard Whitmore. Leonard owned Whitmore Developments, a commercial real estate firm that built shopping plazas and office towers across Ontario. He started it in the early 70s with inherited money and enough business sense to keep it growing. By the time Eleanor and I married, he was worth maybe $12 million, comfortable, respected, and loud about both. What Leonard didn't know was that starting in 1989, I'd been quietly purchasing shares in his company, always indirectly, through lawyers, through holding companies, through trusts designed to stay invisible. 10% here, another 15% there, nothing dramatic enough to raise alarms. By 2003, I owned 47% of Whitmore Developments. I was the largest shareholder. Every expansion Leonard bragged about at family gatherings, every new project he took credit for, every time the company hit a financial rough patch and mysteriously received a timely infusion of capital, it all traced back to me. Leonard believed he was self-made. He had no idea his empire had been standing on my money for over 2 decades. At first, it was just business. The company was undervalued and positioned well for growth. But over time, as Leonard's disdain for me never softened, it became something else. Not revenge, insurance, a card I never planned to play. Until last month. It started with a phone call from Eleanor. Her voice was tight, the way it gets when she's trying not to cry. "My father wants to have dinner," she said. "All of us. He says it's important." In 37 years of marriage, Leonard had invited us to exactly 4 dinners: her mother's funeral, our daughter's graduation, Eleanor's 50th birthday, where he spent most of the night talking to other guests, and now this. Did he say why? I asked. Something about the company. Our daughter, Lily, was 35, unmarried, a social worker in Regent Park. She had Eleanor's values, thank God. She lived in a small apartment, drove an aging Honda, and spent most of her income helping people who had nothing. Leonard had always been disappointed in her. Not wealthy enough, not ambitious enough, not interested in the family business. When is it? I asked. Saturday, 7 o'clock, his place in Rosedale. I'd been to Leonard's house maybe a dozen times in my life. Every visit felt like an exam designed for me to fail. We'll go. Whatever this is, we'll face it together. That Saturday, I put on my best suit, 10 years old, bought on sale, carefully pressed. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress. We drove our 2015 Toyota Corolla through the drizzle, past the manicured streets of Rosedale, and pulled into Leonard's circular driveway. A Tesla and a Mercedes were already there. The Mercedes was Eleanor's brother Andrew, 42, vice president of sales at Whitmore Developments, living off his father's money and calling it ambition. We rang the bell. A housekeeper I didn't recognize let us in and guided us to the formal dining room, a table set for 12, only 6 place settings. Leonard sat at the head, of course, and the distance between us said everything. Part 2. Leonard stood when Eleanor entered, offering her a stiff smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You look well," he said, kissing her cheek. He didn't acknowledge me at all. After 37 years, he still couldn't bring himself to shake my hand. I nodded politely and took my place at the far end of the table. Eleanor sat beside me. The seating arrangement wasn't accidental. It never was. Andrew lounged across from his mother, Margaret, checking the time on an expensive watch like the evening was already inconveniencing him. Margaret, to her credit, gave us a small, apologetic smile. She'd always been kinder than Leonard, though never brave enough to challenge him. "Where's Lily?" Margaret asked. "She's on her way," Eleanor said. "Work emergency." Andrew scoffed quietly. "Of course." The first course arrived, some kind of French soup that tasted like effort. We ate in silence until Lily rushed in, slightly breathless, still wearing her practical coat and carrying her oversized work bag. "Sorry I'm late," she said, kissing her mother's cheek and squeezing my shoulder. She didn't apologize to Leonard. That was my girl. Leonard cleared his throat, setting his spoon down with deliberate precision. "Now that we're all here, I'll be direct. I'm 71 years old. I've built Whitmore Developments into one of the most successful real estate firms in Ontario, but I won't be around forever." Andrew leaned forward, barely containing his grin. "I've decided it's time to finalize the succession plan," Leonard continued. "Andrew will assume the role of CEO when I retire next year. The transition is already underway." Andrew nodded solemnly. "I'm honored, Dad." "I know you are," Leonard said, pleased. He then turned to Eleanor and Lily. "This affects you as well. Your mother and I have updated our estate plans. Andrew will inherit controlling interest in the company. Eleanor, you'll receive a minority share, 5%. Eleanor's hand tightened around mine. "And Lily," Leonard said, "you'll receive a cash settlement, $250,000. I considered attaching conditions, but your grandmother felt that would be unkind." "How thoughtful." Lily smiled thinly. Leonard missed the sarcasm entirely. "I've also taken steps to ensure Eleanor's financial security," he went on, finally looking at me. "Daniel, I assume you've put something aside for retirement." "We're comfortable," I said. Leonard repeated the word like it offended him. Comfortable. "Well, I've arranged a position for you with the company. Entry-level facilities management. $35,000 a year, full benefits. At your age, you should be grateful." The room went still. Even Andrew looked uneasy. Eleanor started to speak, but I squeezed her hand. "It's fine," I said. "Let him finish." Leonard straightened. "The position begins in January. You'll report directly to Andrew. I expect punctuality, discipline, a strong work ethic." I met his gaze. "I'll have to decline." "Decline?" Leonard laughed sharply. "Daniel, you're 63. You spent your life in a factory. I'm offering you dignity." "I'm not interested." Andrew jumped in. "You don't understand. This is a real opportunity." "I understand perfectly." Leonard's face flushed. "You're being offered a chance to finally contribute something to this family instead of dragging my daughter down." Eleanor stood. "That's enough." "This doesn't concern you," Leonard snapped. "It concerns me when you insult my husband." "Husband? He couldn't even provide the life you deserved. Do you know what people say when they ask about my son-in-law? They laugh." That was when I stood. "Leonard," I said calmly, "there's been a misunderstanding. Several, actually." He scoffed. "Oh?" I pulled out my phone. "You see, Whitmore Developments wasn't built from nothing. It was built with help. Significant help." Leonard waved me off. "Institutional investors, standard." "Yes, but one investor owns 47% of the company. Have you ever wondered who that is?" Silence crept in. "That information is confidential," Leonard said. "It was until this morning." I turned the phone toward him. An email. Subject line, "Disclosure of beneficial ownership." Leonard's hands shook as he reached for his own phone. "What is this?" he whispered. "That's my holding company, Foster Capital. I've been your largest shareholder since 2003. Andrew grabbed the phone. "This is fake. He doesn't have that kind of money." I swiped to another document. Net worth, assets, diversified holdings. $1.4 billion, I said quietly. Whitmore Developments is about 3% of my portfolio. Eleanor stared at me, stunned. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Because it never mattered. We were happy." Leonard slumped back into his chair, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to say. The silence stretched so long it became uncomfortable. Leonard's face had drained of color, the confidence he'd carried for decades collapsing inward like a poorly supported wall. Andrew was the first to move, pacing a step away from the table as if physical distance might undo what he'd just read. "This is a setup," Andrew said, his voice tight. "Some kind of manipulation. You don't just wake up a billionaire." I looked at him calmly. "You're right. You don't wake up one. You become one, slowly, quietly, while other people are too busy underestimating you to notice." Leonard found his voice, thin and brittle. "I would have known. I review reports. I sign off on decisions." "You sign what your advisors put in front of you," I said. "You never asked who Bennett-level investors really were, because you assumed they couldn't be someone like me." Margaret covered her mouth, eyes shining with disbelief. Eleanor hadn't moved. She was still holding my hand, staring at me like she was seeing an old photograph come to life. "You let him belittle you," she said softly. "All these years." "I let him talk. There's a difference." Leonard pushed himself up from his chair. "You think this gives you power over me." "I know it does, but that's not why I'm here." Andrew slammed his hand on the table. "We'll fight this. Court, media. You think we'll just roll over?" I said evenly, "But everything is legal, documented, transparent. And tomorrow morning, the board meets at 10. Leonard froze. "What board meeting?" "The emergency one I called, as the largest shareholder." His shoulders sagged. He looked old then, not wealthy, not powerful, just tired. "What do you want?" Margaret asked quietly. I turned to Eleanor and Lily before answering. "I want this family to stop being measured by control and humiliation." Leonard laughed weakly. "You're destroying me." "No," I said, "I'm giving you a choice. Resign tomorrow, step into a consulting role, keep your dignity, or fight it and lose publicly." Andrew slammed his hand on the table. "Dad?" Leonard raised a hand. "Enough." He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in nearly 4 decades. "You could have done this years ago." "Yes," I said, "but it was never about revenge." "Then why now?" "Because tonight you reminded Eleanor that her value to you was conditional, and you reminded Lily she was an afterthought. That's where I draw the line." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Lily stood and wrapped her arms around her mother. We left shortly after that. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just quiet footsteps through a house built to impress people who didn't matter. The drive home was silent at first. Rain streaked the windshield as familiar streets replaced manicured ones. $1.4 billion, Eleanor said, a shaky laugh breaking through tears. "And we live in a house with a stubborn furnace." "It's a good furnace," I said. She laughed again, then leaned her head against the window. "You really never cared about the money." "Then money was never the point. It was freedom and safety." Lily spoke from the back seat. "So what happens now?" "Now your grandfather resigns, your uncle argues, the board votes, a professional CEO steps in, the company improves. And us? We go home, same as always." The next morning, Leonard called before sunrise. "I'll resign," he said. His voice sounded hollow. "I'll say I want time with family." "I appreciate that." He hesitated. "Why did you stay silent all these years?" I paused. "Because love doesn't need applause, and protection doesn't need credit." The board meeting went exactly as expected. Leonard stepped down, Andrew was placed on leave, new leadership took over. Life didn't change much after that. We stayed in our house, kept the same car. Eleanor started volunteering again at the community center where we met. Lily expanded her work, opening doors for people who'd been ignored far too long. The money funded it quietly. Leonard became better, not perfect, but present, less sharp, less cruel. Sometimes people ask why I chose a simple life when I could have had anything. I tell them I already did. Some people count wealth in dollars. I always counted it in mornings like this. Eggs on the stove, rain tapping the windows, the people I love safe in the next room.